can't really believe it's more than 2 years since Hamas committed those murderous crimes at the Nobel Festival and in nearby communities in Israel. It feels like yesterday that I sat here and told you of my grief as a Jew at the slaughter of hundreds of innocent people to whom I'm related by the accident of birth. In a world that has become so volatile, time seems to move at lightning speed for most of us, but not for those taken hostage by Hamas or their devastated families. Every day of captivity must have felt an eternity. Imagine the hope and trepidation that last night gripped the nearest and dearest of the 20 remaining living hostages, who were, thank goodness, freed this morning at long last. That sense of misery with no end has also overwhelmed more than 2 million Palestinians trapped in that tiny strip of land called Gaza, deprived of food and water for months, powerless as the bombs rained down, devastated by the killing of tens of thousands of them. So there is no superlative too great to try and capture the hopes of this historic moment. Now the fighting has stopped and families on both sides of the border are reunited. And if you can't give credit to Donald Trump, if you fail to acknowledge the decisive role he has played, you are a victim of this age where hate too often triumphs over reason. Even so, we cannot know that ceasefire will become sustainable peace, even if Trump proclaimed it so in his idiosyncratic speech to Israel's parliament today. His nutshell was that everyone in the Middle East would get rich or richer if only there were a durable accommodation between Israel and the Palestinians in Gaza, and if only Saudi Arabia would adopt full diplomatic and commercial relations with Israel as a new signatory to the Abraham Accords. Trump's appeal was to the venal worst of us rather than the humanitarian best of us. But maybe money will talk louder than morality. Pippa.
Yes, Robert. In an extraordinary speech to the Israeli parliament, Trump proclaimed a historic dawn of a new Middle East before he and other leaders headed to a summit in Sharm el-Sheikh to work out exactly what that would look like. Everyone agrees on the need for aid and security in Gaza, but who will deliver it? Trump's plan set out a stabilisation force led by the US, but details are still scarce. It's been suggested that Turkey, Egypt, Qatar and the UAE would both supply troops and pay for it. It would be their job to make sure Israel withdraws from Gaza and that Hamas hands over its weapons. But this is a major sticking point. Netanyahu has warned that if Hamas doesn't do this willingly, then Israel will make it happen the hard way. So where does this leave Israel now? With a year to go until Netanyahu needs to call an election, almost 2/3 of Israelis, as the blue bits shown here, want him to accept responsibility for the October 7 attacks and resign, leaving the future of the region to someone else. So yes, there's joy at the ceasefire today, but also a lot of uncertainty. Robert.
Thanks, Pippa. So there's so much we need to talk about on what certainly feels a really important day. And Layla, I remember that when you were on this show, you told us how anxious you were about your relatives who are still in Gaza. Now, they did manage to get out, but how are they feeling today? Do you think they would have the confidence to return to Gaza?
So, yeah, we managed to get, well, after one tragically did die through lack of any medical attention, we managed to get them out. The eldest of them is pretty confident they'll never go back. There's nothing to go back to. Their house was bombed in Gaza City on October the 8th. And they got on a bus, got into the church where they stayed. And unfortunately, that house no longer exists. So for them to rebuild it in time for my very elderly relative to come back to, repatriating back from the country they've moved to, they can't see it. The younger ones, maybe.
Do you think they have confidence that a sustainable peace is now possible?
Oh, well, I mean, this is the $50 billion question. I choose to believe that this is now possible. And I know that, you know, people are looking at what Trump said today about the sustainable peace in the Middle East and that this is the beginning of it. We have to talk big now. And if you look back at the history of the region. It has taken its lowest lows to then move us forwards towards that two-state solution. So, you know, my question is, I've lost a relative, speaking to Sharone, who's lost relatives. I know people who've lost 50, 60 members of their families. What were those deaths for if it isn't that sustainable peace? And we have to hold on to that now. Everyone who went on a protest, wrote to their MPs, cares about it, shouted at the television, from whatever point of view, if we want those deaths to mean something, then we have to now work towards that two-state solution.
Dawn, we are going to come back and talk in some detail about how you make a sustainable peace in the Middle East, in Israel and Gaza. But we have, and this is important, I think all of us would agree, we've got a ceasefire today. We've seen the last of the living hostages return to their families. We've seen 2,000 Palestinian prisoners transferred back to their families out of Israeli prisons. You're not a fan of Donald Trump, but you have to, I assume, accept that he's done a good thing today, because almost everybody says this would not have happened without his intervention.
I think, I mean, it's very powerful what Layla's just said, and having got a constituent who I would now call a friend, and having fought to help them bring their mum back. It's been a very traumatic 2 years, and actually it's nice to see the hope in people's faces in Israel and in Gaza. And yes, of course, Trump played a huge role in this. It wasn't all Trump. I mean, the deal was Biden's deal, essentially, but Trump gave it that extra edge and got it over the line. But there's lots of people who've played a huge role in this. And I agree with Layla that the most important thing now is that we all talk about how do we get sustainable peace. And it cannot be, Robert, about money. It has to, I mean, that is just so crass. It cannot.
It is what he said. I'm
yes,
telling you what he said.
And he is quite crass. But it cannot be about money. It has to be foremost about peace, morality, how people can live side by side. We cannot unsee what we've seen over the last 2 years. And we have to think, how do we move forward and make things better going forward?
So much more I need to discuss with both of you. But I want now to turn to an interview I did a little earlier with the Foreign Secretary, Yvette Cooper. I pointed out to her that Trump says that what was announced today was, he believed, more than a ceasefire. He actually said it was the best chance for stable peace in the Middle East for 3,000 years. Never one to undersell anything he's associated with. So I started by asking the Foreign Secretary whether Donald Trump was right about the significance of today's deal.
Well, I think what we've all seen today was these incredibly moving images, things that maybe even 3 months ago people just thought were not possible. Families being united, hostages who had been held in captivity for 2 years, the most unimaginable ordeal, going back to see sons back with parents, loved ones back together again. So this is a hugely important moment, and alongside the ceasefire and also the restoration of humanitarian aid after tens of thousands of people have lost their lives as a result of this appalling conflict over the last 2 years. But it is part of a 20-point plan that President Trump has set out. It's part of a wider initiative. I think that is really important. It is phase one. There's a lot of work still to do. But I think it's the fact that it is part of this wider plan to deliver a just and lasting peace with security for Palestinians and Israelis alike. That is what has made this so important, and also has made it possible to get to the ceasefire now.
So I want to get on to the next phase in this process, but would you agree that this is President Trump's personal towering achievement? And do you think, as the Israeli Prime Minister thinks, that he should get the Nobel Peace Prize next year?
Well, he's clearly been a driving force behind this. This has relied on President Trump himself being prepared to show this leadership. There's obviously a lot of...
Nobel Peace Prize?
Well, that's obviously the process that has to take place independently, but I don't think anybody should be in doubt about the scale of the work that President Trump has himself done.
What gets us to phase two? What do you understand about this board of peace? Donald Trump seemed to me to imply, and has addressed the Knesset, that he will be chairing it. There is the likelihood that Tony Blair will be a member of it. Will that effectively be the governing body for Gaza, and if so, for how long?
Palestine needs to be run by Palestinians, and Gaza needs to be run by Palestinians.
Or immediately or after a transition?
So I think, look, there's a first phase is going to be actually just implementing the first phase as well. We're making sure that the aid gets back in, making sure that we've got that restoration of humanitarian aid. That's
but in first phase for Netanyahu, but just on this, because there are some really complicated issues here.
Yeah.
So, Israel is saying that Hamas has to be disarmed. How does that even happen?
Yeah, so that is going to be part of phase two. That is part of the 20-point plan. So there's a whole series of different things. It includes a Palestinian committee that needs to be set up to actually run run services in Palestine.
Underneath this Board of Peace?
So the Board of Peace was set out in the 20-point plan as overseeing the peace process, but actually the delivery of services, the decisions taken in Gaza itself, the 20-point plan envisages that being done by a Palestinian committee.
I mean, as far as I can see, Tony Blair was the only sort of non-leader on the stage with President Trump in Egypt this afternoon. Is it good for Britain that Blair's at the heart of this?
Well, he's been nominated. Tony Blair's been nominated by President Trump. We are expecting other people to be put forward for the Board of Peace.
But is it good for Britain?
Well, I think, look, this is about the effectiveness of the peace process. I think this is actually not about what's right for Britain or for France or for the US. This is actually about what is right for the Middle East and the process that President Trump has set out. We're expecting other people to be nominated as well, including other leaders, former leaders, and so on. So all of that will be established as part of the second phase of negotiations.
If this is proper peace, should we resume selling arms to Israel?
Well, I think we have got a whole series of stages to go right now, and the first phase is to make sure that the ceasefire is implemented and also to make sure that we get the restoration of aid. Then there's the second phase still to be established. The thing that we have been very clear about is that in the end, the only way to get a just and lasting peace is a two-state solution, and that needs to be a peaceful Palestine, a peaceful Israel living alongside each other, both of them in security.
Now, we've got to move on to a substantially different subject, and Pippa is going to set it up for us.
Thanks, Robert. Should we be cozying up to China or keeping it out in the cold? This question has troubled governments for years. While they want closer economic ties, spy chiefs have urged caution. Now, back in November 2021, the head of MI6 warned that China had become its single greatest priority. Prosecutors allege that just a month later, Christopher Cash, who worked for a Tory MP, and his friend Christopher Berry, a researcher based in China, began spying for Beijing. They were arrested in March 2023 and a year later were charged under the now repealed Official Secrets Act. They both denied the charges. In July even, 2024, a different spy trial of 6 Bulgarians accused of helping Russia set a legal precedent that an enemy state had to pose a current threat to the national security of the UK. Because of this, prosecutors asked the government for more evidence of China being a threat at the time the two men were accused of spying. Prosecutors say that efforts to obtain that evidence were made over many months. More witness statements were provided, but it wasn't enough. So the charges were dropped. Politicians have been pointing fingers ever since, with the Tories accusing the government of deliberately collapsing the case to smooth relations with Beijing. Robert.
Thanks. So your government has said that it deeply regrets the collapse of this trial. Now, as Pippa has pointed out, the CPS tried over months to get the kind of supporting statement that it needed. We learned this afternoon in the House of Commons from Dan Jarvis, your colleague, that the Deputy National Security Advisor just never provided that. What on earth went wrong? Why did Matthew Collins never provide the relevant evidence?
So I remain deeply frustrated by this case, and I think I've been very clear. I think we wanted to see this prosecution go ahead, and also I think we should be clear that the kind of activity that was being alleged in this case, that kind of activity, I think should be illegal. It should be the kind of case that faces the legal processes, criminal processes, and that's why we supported a change in the law, the modernisation of the law in this area that makes those kinds of prosecutions much clearer and much easier. I think we've also said, and I've said in the past as well, that it was clear that China poses threats to national security. It is also our third biggest trading partner, so of course that is a complex relationship. But those threats to national security include cyber threats, include the transnational repression, include the kind of political industrial espionage, and include the support for Russia as well at the current time. So a whole series of different areas. But this was an independent legal process about offences and framework at the time.
But they blame it on the fact that you, as a government, in the shape of, apparently, Matthew Collins, didn't provide the information they needed. Now, this was after, right? I mean, the offence, the alleged offence committed by these two individuals was after China was found to have hacked the Electoral Commission, right? The previous government put that on the record. So there was very clear evidence that they were you listed cyber. There are plenty of other... I mean, I remember Rishi Sunak saying in 2022 and 2023 that he regarded China as the greatest economic threat that we faced, right? So why was it that Matthew Collins just didn't supply any of this?
So ministers were not involved in any of the evidence for the case, and also this was a decision for the Crown Prosecution Service, an independent legal process.
Yeah, but they pushed it back to you. They've said it's because they did not get the cooperation they needed from the government.
There were decisions that had to be made by the independent Crown Prosecution Service about what threshold had to be met, and also there was evidence given independently to them that ministers were not involved in. Of course, the added complexity of this is that these were offences.
Sorry, for a second. You haven't answered the question. Was this a cock-up on your part? I don't mean you personally. I mean the government.
So let me just finish the point. Of course, the complexity with this is that this was offences that took place under the previous government and under previous legislation. So for that reason, ministers were not involved, and that was clearly the case. So I did not see any of the evidence that was put to the Crown Prosecution Service, and that was an independent decision that the Crown Prosecution Service faced. But if you ask me, am I frustrated about this whole process and the lack of prosecution?
Honestly,
then yes, I am.
Look, I've been around this for long enough to know that what you've just said makes no sense. You inherit, as the new government, decisions taken by the previous government. You know, this was not a prosecution of ministers. This was about the position of the government. So the notion that you, as ministers, were not consulted by the National Security Advisor, or in this case, apparently it just makes no sense.
And that's the process that we've inherited, where the CPS sought advice and sought expert witness from the Deputy National Security Advisor, who gave evidence.
But why did the Deputy National Security Advisor not go to his boss, who then should have gone to his boss about this? It makes, I'm sorry to say this, none of it makes sense.
So ministers were not consulted.
But why not? Do you understand why they weren't consulted? I'm sorry to press you on this, but it makes no sense. Why were ministers not consulted?
So ministers
were not. Know the answer to that question?
Ministers were not, and this.
But do you not know why they were not?
Hang on a second, Robert. This was a process involving the independent Crown Prosecution Service, who sought the evidence. They chose which witnesses they wanted to seek evidence from, and those witnesses had to then give personal evidence to the Crown Prosecution Service. Do I think that this was an extremely frustrating process? Does it involve laws, previous laws, and also the previous government? And do we end up with a very frustrating process that means that the kind of activity which clearly should face legal processes ends up, as a result, not doing so? This remains a matter of extreme frustration for me and for many other people.
OK, you're saying that Matthew Collins didn't consult his political masters. Do you know whether he consulted his boss, Jonathan Powell?
So my understanding is that, no, the National Security Advisor was not involved in this process in terms of the content of the evidence that was put forward.
So do you have any confidence in this man, Matthew Collins? Can he keep his job on this basis?
So the Deputy National Security Advisor had to give evidence on the basis of what happened before I was in government. While he was still in government, but before I was in government. That does make this process more complicated than dealing with other cases because of the change in government at the time. So we have to recognise that. And we do also inherit a situation where the previous government chose not to change the law for many years, despite having been advised against doing so. But the most important thing is we do now have a change in the law. We have to be very clear about the importance of both being strong against national security threats that may be posed by China and also, alongside that, recognising the investment, recognising the economic relationships and so on as well. That is the complexity of the relationship that we have.
Look, with the best will in the world, I don't think this is going to go away because, in the end, a decision you regret taken by the CPS happened on your watch. Final question. This embassy in the Royal Mint that China wants to open, should it be allowed to open it?
There's an independent planning process. As you know, we don't comment on planning processes.
But you've admitted that they pose a national security threat. They're not allowing you to see various rooms that plainly sort of serve a material purpose for them. Surely they shouldn't get permission to open the embassy.
There have been a series of discussions about security issues and about security mitigations. As you'll know, there's always countries do have embassies, and there always have to be security questions about those embassies. The UK also has an embassy in Beijing, where we've been seeking improvements, modernisations and a new embassy buildings in Beijing as well. So these issues always have to be dealt with by countries. What we do ensure is that where there are national security issues, those are taken immensely seriously. You'll appreciate there is an independent planning process, but those issues are taken extremely seriously.
Foreign Secretary, as always, very good to see you. Thank you. So later on, Dawn, as I said, I'm going to come back to what's happening in Israel and Gaza after the break. But Layla, if I could just start with you. The position of the Foreign Secretary and the position of the government is that this case collapsed because a single individual, relatively junior, the Deputy National Security Advisor, didn't provide the Crown Prosecution Service with the evidence that it needed. And this is over many months. You heard from Pippa that the Crown Prosecution Service says on the record he'd asked many times over months for the requisite evidence. This one individual didn't provide it, and the case collapses to the regret of the government. Does any of this make sense to you?
No, it doesn't. I'm sorry. I think you did, for what it's worth, a fabulous job of exposing that the government has got itself in a total twist over this. I could feel the frustration, actually, I think, from Yvette Cooper as well. And I'm not sure they fully want to tell us what happened, but in the interest of transparency, they really should. Because this is a national scandal. We had infiltration of Parliament. These men should absolutely be standing trial because of what they did, because of the national security threat. And this case has collapsed, and no one yet understands why. It's nonsensical. So what the Liberal Democrats are calling for is an independent inquiry into what the hell happened here. Because clearly, you asking questions of the Foreign Secretary is not sufficient to get to the bottom of that. And if that isn't sufficient, then we need someone independent to come in to work out what on earth happened.
Dawn, I mean, plainly, we've got to see what it was Matthew Collins actually said to the CPS, don't we?
I think also on why it wasn't prosecuted when they were first charged back in 2023. So what was the delay I think, because I think if it was all done in 2023, if there was enough evidence to charge them, it should have been done and dusted, they should have taken the evidence and it should be prosecuted. Obviously, there's this delay now, and what has caused the delay, I understand that the chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee may well be taking some evidence, and maybe that will give a little bit more detail as to what's happened.
But can I just ask you, you've both been around this scene for quite a long time. Not as long as me, actually, but nonetheless, because I'm a bit older than you, but nonetheless. Does it make sense to you that the Deputy National Security Advisor would give evidence in such an important case? This is a really sensitive and important case, and apparently wouldn't consult his boss, wouldn't consult relevant ministers. This is just weird.
But also, would the CPS just be relying on one person that gave enough evidence in order for them to charge? And I think that is that is one of the questions that needs to be answered. And I think, as I said, the chair of the Select Committee, Emily Thornberry, I think is going to take some evidence on this, and it does. Otherwise, it's not going to go away. So there does need to be some more
Something
information.
doesn't smell right here, does it? It just doesn't. So
I mean, it's either a monumental cock-up or it's a conspiracy, and we need to know which.
I think it's less of a conspiracy, to be fair, but I do think that the last government should have just dealt with it, and it would have been dealt with because that's when they would charge.
Well, the problem is it's now raising questions about, does this government have a fundamentally different view about China because of its pursuit of economic growth?
But the interesting thing is that the Foreign Secretary gave us a whole list of reasons.
Those are the questions.
But I don't think that's the case, though, because
which is why transparency is so important. I'm not saying it is or isn't.
Yeah.
But at the moment,
because the law's been changed now, hasn't it? So actually, the burden of proof is not as harsh as an enemy of the state is causing a threat. So actually, that's in a way that's been lessened.
But even so, Dawn, I mean, one of the things that I was really struck by in my conversation with the Foreign Secretary is she actually started by listing all the ways in which China was a threat, was a serious threat to us. So if they take that position, what they've just described as the process in this case is extraordinary. Look, very finally, because we've got to go to a break, on this issue of the embassy. Actually, both of you, do you think that China should be allowed, on the current basis of what we know about it, to open this embassy?
No, clearly not. No, it is not in our national security to allow this super embassy to go ahead. It's very clear.
Dawn?
I kind of agree. It's a huge embassy. There's lots of questions. To say that there's rooms that, you're not allowed to go in or look at, it's deeply concerning. But remember, China already is invested in shares in our water, electricity.
Oh, sure.
They're hugely embedded in our infrastructure in this country.
They are. Now, tons more I need to talk to both of you about. Please don't go away, because I'll also be joined by a hugely impressive person, Sharone Lifschitz, whose parents were captured by Hamas on October the 7th. And obviously, I want to get from her what she feels the significance of today's release of hostages and ceasefire, what that really means to her. So come back after the break.
Well, welcome to the break. This week, of course, it was announced that the 2025 Nobel Peace Prize would go to the Venezuelan opposition leader, Maria Corina Machado. I hope I've pronounced that properly. After she received the award, she was on the phone to Donald Trump, who was nominated for the 8th time this year, and said that he deserves to win the prize in future. Layla, do you agree? Do you think he should have received it this year or get it in future?
Not yet, but frankly, if he does achieve Middle East peace, which includes an independent Palestinian state, I'll nominate him myself.
Oh my goodness. Dawn, what about you?
No, I'm not going to nominate him. I don't think somebody who causes terror and trauma in their own country would be a suitable candidate for the Nobel Peace Prize, even if he does achieve peace in the Middle East, which I hope with all my heart that does happen.
So Layla's withdrawing her nomination now.
Well, I just think if he wants a big gold star and he does good things as a result, go for it.
OK, so we've got a wee game for you here. I'm going to ask you, which of the following have not won a Nobel Peace Prize? Obviously, there's Aung San Suu Kyi up here, Mahatma Gandhi, the European Union, Mother Teresa, and Henry Kissinger. Who do you think?
Mother Teresa.
I was
Layla thinks Mother Teresa.
Has a European Union won a Peace Prize?
I suspect it did.
As a organisation? Okay.
Well, it was conceived out of the idea that if you trade together, you don't war together.
Okay.
So that was kind of the whole...
Robert's boiling it. The answer is actually Gandhi. He never received... he was nominated 5 times, but he never won. Now, which of the following...
That feels wrong.
Have... Well, it does, very. Which of the following have not been nominated? So Michael Jackson, Joseph Stalin, Adolf Hitler, Vladimir Putin, George Bush Jr. and Elon Musk.
What a lineup!
Not been nominated.
Who's not been nominated?
I bet Trump nominated Musk, didn't he, or something, to help him.
So who do you think wasn't
for helping
nominated?
him?
Oh, my God.
Well, I would hope...
I don't know.
Go on, hope Hitler wasn't.
Hitler or Stalin? Which one?
Okay, Layla.
Michael Jackson.
Michael Jackson. Well, the answer is they've all been nominated.
No, really?
How about that?
Are we beginning to question the Nobel Peace Prize?
I feel like there's a conversation to be had about the nomination process.
Yeah.
Anyway.
OK, goodbye.
Welcome back. Now we're going to return to the historic events in Israel and Gaza today. And to set us up, Pippa's got some information.
Now, I just want to show you very quickly this very striking Time magazine front page. His triumph, a picture of Donald Trump there. The leader Israel needed, says Ehud Barak, who, of course, is a former Prime Minister of Israel. And How Gaza Heals is another article that they are... they've got it in there. Rebuilding Gaza will obviously be a monumental challenge for whoever ends up being responsible. Now, we've all seen the images of devastation from 2 years of war. This striking analysis of satellite imagery by researchers at Oregon State University highlights how every population centre across the Strip has seen buildings damaged or destroyed, just as hundreds of thousands are starting to head home. But what will they find there? Have a look at these charts. The United Nations estimates that 92% of homes in Gaza, yes, that's almost all of them, have been destroyed, while 62% of people have lost the documents that prove they own them. And when it comes to infrastructure, just 39% of hospitals are functional, all only partially, while 9 out of every 10 schools needs full or major reconstruction. Now, these charts show that 97% of tree crops have been damaged, while 82% of annual crops have been lost. With Gaza still in the grip of famine, the territory is going to be struggling to be self-sufficient for some time to come. Robert.
So, as Pippa points out, if we get to the Sustainable Peace Phase 2 negotiations, leading to a two-state solution, the amount of... just the challenge of making life bearable again for Palestinians is absolutely immense. I just want to really ask both of you, you will have heard both what the Foreign Secretary just said on this programme, but you'll have been following this story throughout the day. Plainly so important to get the living hostages out, plainly really important to see the military ceasing their operation, the Israeli military ceasing their operation in Israel. But how do we get to to phase two. It's not even clear to any of us who among the Palestinians is capable of representing all the Palestinians in these talks. Layla, try and give us a sort of optimistic scenario for how we move to something that looks as historic as Donald Trump says it is.
Well, first of all, you have to remember that within that 20-point plan itself, there is talk of an independent Palestinian state and Palestinian self-determination. That's huge.
Yeah.
And that will have in no small part been played by the likes of Saudi Arabia, who have said that they absolutely make this a red line. So actually, MBS in Saudi Arabia plays a huge part in this. It's interesting that all through the day, Trump kept referring to Saudi Arabia as wanting to join his Abraham Accords. They are his big carrot. And interesting, MBS wasn't there today in Sharm. So he's got some big cards to play, and I hope he holds out, because it is that independent Palestinian state that we need. I was disappointed also not to see Netanyahu at that summit.
Although he did speak to Sisi, which is the first time he's done for an enormously long time, and people doubted he would even do that.
Fair enough, but we also know that Netanyahu...
Egypt's Prime Minister, by the way.
Yeah, Netanyahu over and over again has rejected an independent Palestinian state and a two-state solution. So, look, we have lots of actors on all sides that have lots of cards to play and lots of agendas. But at its kernel is an international community that today I did see hope. I saw hope in that lineup of people, in that lineup of countries. Our own countries recognise the state of Palestine just recently, who have said, we need not the end of the war in Gaza. That is not a peace. The end of war is not peace. The only way you stop this from happening again is you have the establishment of two states living side by side, dignity and security for all peoples in that region. And that is the only way you do that. Now, that was the first time in my lifetime that I felt I started to see the international community come round that. And once the international community starts to exert pressure, those leaders will come. Believe me, they are there. They will come.
Dawn, Benjamin Netanyahu, Prime Minister of Israel, has repeatedly said he does not believe in a two-state solution. He has repeatedly said that he needs to see Hamas disarmed and the tunnels destroyed. Do you believe that moving to a sustainable peace is possible while Netanyahu is still Prime Minister?
I don't personally know, but I also think that there's people in Israel that don't want him to be Prime Minister any longer either. And I think also in rebuilding Gaza, that it's more than just rebuilding physical homes, as like Pippa's chart showed. There's, you know, the generational land and farming and wealth, that's all been destroyed. So all of that has to somehow be rebuilt. The occupation needs to end and stop. And you have, you know, both sides will have to come together. And there absolutely has to be two states.
Yeah, just very quickly, the thing that's also missing, it's not just homes. It's also civil society in Palestine that has been hollowed out over many decades. And that in part explains why we haven't seen some of those political leaders come forward. I'm
going to come back to you and talk to you about much more about this in a moment, but I'm delighted to be joined by Sharone Lifschitz. I mean, your story, the story of your family, so powerful, so moving. Your parents both kidnapped on October the 7th. Your father tragically murdered while in captivity. Your mother, just released. And then this sort of act of forgiveness to those who were her captors, saying, Shalom, I think I remember her saying. Is that right? As she left. It was extraordinary and so moving. I suppose I just wanted to start by asking you, seeing those remaining living hostages released today, how did you feel?
Wow. I feel a little bit like a child learning to walk again, like somebody who had a major stroke who's learning almost to breathe again. That's how I feel. I feel that as the family of the hostage wrapped around by the majority of Israelis, that I absolutely agree. The majorities of Israelis for a very long time have been for the end of war and for a hostage deal, and they won. endless demonstrations, countless demonstrations, hundreds of thousands on the street. I really have the feeling we have done it together. We brought these people in spite of the government of Israel, who's been against it, who has also been in charge of our devastation. I haven't begun to really feel. I feel like something came out, like the pain is eased, and we are just going to slowly learn to breathe. The dead hostages need to return as well, and that's going to be complicated.
Have you spoken to your mum today?
Yeah.
What did she say to you?
That she can breathe again. She said, I can just start to breathe. I said, yeah.
And what do you, I mean, maybe this is too trite a question, but what did two of you think about Trump, out of interest?
I don't really care what I think about him, because I feel that at this point, he is the person who was able to move us somewhere else. And I really very much hope that he will continue to move us and make the next stages inevitable and bring a lasting ceasefire that we can build from. And I think at this point, he managed to do that, and I'm so grateful.
One of the things that I and so many people have been moved by is your humanity. You, before your parents were kidnapped, but since, you passionately believe in a two-state solution and reconciliation between the Israeli people and the Palestinians. Now, obviously, that doesn't mean that you have any empathy or sympathy for the terrorists who murdered, you know, your father and so many of your fellow citizens, and you have no sympathy for Hamas. But how do we move towards the building of understanding between these two communities now?
You know, to myself, I keep saying that if all of us will overcome our fear and hate, then the rest is just politics. And I think that civil society is very wounded on both sides, have been through horrific 2 years. I know my community, we haven't started really mourning. We just started. We have a devastated kibbutz. From our devastated kibbutz, we can see the devastated Gaza. It's very visceral, it's very there. And we need to, first of all, start making life possible again on both sides of the border. And I think, for me, Hamas, so long as Hamas is there, we've seen what Hamas have done the last 2 days in terms of retribution to its own people. I think I said it before that, you know, they were not nice when they came to us. They created the most horrific atrocities. But I'm absolutely certain of how horrible they are towards their own people. They are a terrorist, horrific organization. And so long as they are controlling Gaza, nothing good will happen. So the next stage, the most important thing to happen now, is to dry them out, make them not run Gaza. Then we will start being able to hear what Gazan people can say.
Sharone, thank you for being with us. There's so much more I need to talk to you about. So for all of you at home, don't go away, because much more to talk about on this historic day.
And welcome to The Break. Now, today marks the 100th anniversary of Margaret Thatcher's birth. And a YouGov poll published for the centenary found that she's the top choice for best Prime Minister of the last 50 years, taking 29% of the vote. Tony Blair, if you're interested, came second on 12%. Now, I know that neither of you are Conservatives and not necessarily even fans of Margaret Thatcher, but can you understand why people voted that way, Dawn? Do you think how do you think she measures up against
voted? I'd like to know the voting
British
pool.
The British publication.
How many people were surveyed?
Just don't believe it.
I'd like more details. It's too simple to just say, you know, she's the top politician. But I suppose in this era, you know, being moved by Sharone in terms of sort of, you know, looking at people in and around, she was decisive, although she wasn't a feminist, and lots of the problems that we see now she caused, from, you know, selling off council homes and not building new homes. You know, her problem by saying there's no such thing as society, having people, even though it was fewer words than that, but, you know, having people just think about self rather than others. You know, she broke up communities, and we need to bring communities together, and that was her.
OK, now I'm going to ask you to rate these Thatcher policies from best to worst. So we have education reforms, the 1988 Act, which brought in the national curriculum, league tables, grant maintained schools and so on.
The milk snatcher, she got rid of the milk.
Well, when I was 5 years old in Scotland...
Yeah. But I was OK with getting rid of the milk because I didn't like it. But, you know what I mean? Really
it was
thick
always
cream.
it was actually a bit warm, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was horrible.
Transforming the City of London, mandatory seatbelt law, obviously saving lots of lives, privatisation of public services, and then, of course, like removing free school meal. Layla, what do you think? Rate them first.
I'm willing to give her the seatbelts. I think that was a good thing. She was a scientist. We were talking earlier. She was a chemist as well.
Yep.
So she was, and I'm told that some of her research helped to develop the Mr. Whippy ice cream.
Oh, there we
So
go.
that wasn't her as a politician, but that was an achievement, I think.
So a win for the milk, win for the World War milk, and Mr. Whippy. Thank you both very much.
Welcome back. I'm delighted that Sharone Lifschitz is still here. You said something very powerful before the break about how today you and your mother felt you could sort of breathe, or start to breathe again, start to live again, really, I think is what you're saying, with the release of the final living hostages. But the trauma that you and many of your citizens suffered, and obviously many Palestinians suffered. This is a very hard question, but how do you, have you thought about how you get over that kind of trauma? Because patently you are somebody who firmly believes that, you know, your community has to live in peace with neighbouring communities.
To be fair, most of our energy, so many people around me, most of our energy for the last 2 years was with returning the hostages.
Yeah.
Seeing Silvia Cunha hugging both her sons today.
Amazing.
I know her as a woman that dances endlessly, and just the thought of her filling her heart.
I can't imagine.
At the same time, I belong to 43 families whose loved ones arrived in Gaza alive and were killed there. And we also feel that that deal could have been done a lot earlier. Many of our loved ones could have been saved, and the feeling is horror. I cannot tell you. For so long, we fought for the live one to return and for the dead one. And now with their return, there's a reckoning that needs to happen. There's some justice that needs to happen for the families of the 7th of October and for the families of the hostages. We are campaigning for a national inquiry, and the government is very much against it. But beyond that, for me personally, it is when I meet like-minded people from the other side, when I feel that it's not hate that is winning, because hate is really hot-headed. and it can transform our streets in the UK, let alone, in Gaza and Israel. I think that's the work we need to do now, the work of the heart.
And I wanted to pick up on that. I mean, there has been this horrifying rise in anti-Semitism in the UK. There's also been a rise in Islamophobia. We have seen a breakdown or a worsening of relations between these important communities in Britain, the Muslim community and the Jewish community. How worried are you? I mean, you live here now. How worried are you about that?
I lived here most of my life. I am worried. I feel that there's far too many forces trying to disunite us, to pull us apart, when in fact, when you meet people face to face and you have a conversation, you are able to find what you have in common. Maybe it's your very opinionated mother, or whether it is your love of certain food, but you feel each other. And I think that is why it's so important at the moment for community not just to kind of forge very strong opinions by watching the feed, but rather to meet, to find ways to build bridges. If we can do it in the UK, it can be a step towards doing it also in the Middle East.
I mean, when you hear somebody who suffered as much as Sharone has suffered just calling for mutual understanding between our communities here, I mean, would you hope that the kind of anger we've seen in the Muslim community, the kind of anger we've seen in the Jewish community, people would just, follow Sharone's example and just try and show a bit more tolerance and understanding?
Yeah, I mean, Sharone, I think, is an incredible woman and advocate for peace. Anyway, but like in my constituency in Brent, I mean, we have multi-faith forums. I mean, people talk, they pray together, they break bread together, they live cheek by jowl together. So, their tensions have got worse over the last 2 years, but they've not kind of been that, sort of overflowing. And there were lots of hostages released today. I mean, I didn't know how many Palestinian hostages there were, and then we heard there was 2,000 that was released.
Women and children.
Women, and children. And you just think there is going to be a lot of reckoning, as Sharone says. I think there's also going to be an investigation into war crimes that have happened. And I think there's a lot that we have to go through, but I absolutely agree with Sharone. You have to meet people. You have to break bread. You have to understand that we are all human beings.
But we're almost out of time, I'm afraid, but
Sorry.
Layla.
No, I mean, you're right that we should be leading this from the UK. If we can't do it here, how can we expect people to do it somewhere else? But it's in Palestine, I mean, we also need an end to the occupation to start to heal those wounds too. We've got a long way to go, but
unfortunately,
sure
we are now out of time. That's it. Now, last week I said we were returning to politics as usual as after those bonkers party conferences, and then Trump did his Gaza thing, so who knows what the coming week will bring. See you next Monday. Good night.